Well, I'm gonna get started right now. So today what we're covering is it's one of the most common questions that we get from very new coaches, and it's something that I see a lot in online spaces where coaches live and train and act and give advice to each other and get advice. And that's, is this even legal? Like, is coaching legal? And for coaches, like for new coaches, it's kind of a big problem because there's already a lot of psychological forces telling new coaches not to start. You're not ready. You're not good enough. You can't do this. And there's this feeling like, I need to ask someone for permission to coach. So they start chasing a certification, or what does accreditation mean? And it's like, the question, what is legal for me to do, becomes, when do I feel comfortable, secure doing this thing? When do I feel like I have permission? So I'll bring up right off the bat, almost everything is legal. And that is both a good and a bad thing for a coach. We're going to go into the limitations right now. Now, let's talk about some of the specifics that come up in online forums about what it is that coaches can and can't do. Some coach will be like, oh, what should I do meal plans for my people? And immediately you go, no, that's outside of scope. You can't do meal plans. But let me ask you a question. If a coach were to say like, hey, you're really stressed by diet, we want to focus on your strength training, how about you sign up for Factor or one of these meal delivery services? That's effectively a meal plan, especially if there are limited options available through that meal delivery service. Would that be illegal? No. People say, you can't prescribe macros. That's outside of your scope. But I can pull a macro plan, like the individual can pull a macro plan off of anywhere that they're going to go. Is it really outside of scope? They'll say like, oh, this person is injured. You can't work with them as a strength coach. Well, if somebody gets injured with you as a strength coach, they bust their ankle, do they have to stop working with you right then? Is that suddenly illegal? Or, oh, my client tells me they're depressed. Am I now suddenly outside of scope because I'm working with someone with a mental health challenge? Like, I bring these examples up because after a certain point, if we say yes to all of these, that none of these are legal, at a certain point, we can't be coaches. Because everyone gets injured, everyone needs detailed advice, everyone feels down for a while and has mental health issues. So let's establish some clarity on the question, on what even is going on. Coaching, at least in the United States, is an unlicensed profession. So it is a profession, is a job, but it is unlicensed. There is no licensure. There is no clear regulation. There is no governing body that says these are coaches in the United States. There are organizations that call themselves coaching, like coaching bodies. They'll offer certifications and accreditations, but those certifications have no legal weight. The fact that you have it only matters to the person who is paying for your services as a demonstration of your skill. It doesn't have any legal weight. Now, if you're operating in Brazil or the United Kingdom or there are a few other countries where there is some level of licensure or de facto licensure, where, for instance, in the UK, technically you could be a coach, but you can't work at any notable gym, and you have no legal protections if you don't have certification through UK reps, I believe it is. So know the laws in your jurisdiction, but in the United States and in most countries, it's unlicensed. So because of that, almost everything is legal, but you are liable. So let's talk about what isn't legal and then how to manage that liability. So coaches talk about scope of practice a lot. Since we are not a licensed profession, we do not have a scope of practice, legally speaking. Like there's no governing body that defines what being a coach is. But we cannot step into licensed professions' scope of practice. For the most part, that means doctors, physical therapists, and dietitians. So as a general rule, let's talk about doctors and physical therapists. We do not claim to treat any illness. We do not claim to fix injury. There are a lot of coaches out there that promise that my neuro programming, will fix your sciatic nerve pain. that is on the borderline of illegal, and they could probably be charged if anyone was, willing to go through with that. Dietetics is a little bit different. So, can you prescribe a meal plan? People talk about like that as though it's a universal no. There are some states that have no regulations on dietetics at all. Many of them have regulations on the title. You cannot call yourself a registered dietitian. And then there's usually some kind of definition of a dietitian's scope that if you cross over that, then you are doing unlicensed dietetics. That's why meal plans are generally, as a good rule, something not to do, because in most states, a meal plan means that the person following your meal plan is constrained. So, and you are not licensed to handle what happens if those constraints aren't correct. Because you are limiting the client's dietary scope, if they find themselves nutrient deficient, or they had an undiagnosed condition that a dietitian would have caught, you're on the hook. You were doing their practice. So we don't fix injuries, we don't treat conditions, and we don't step into dietetics practice. Unfortunately, what that actually means depends state to state. Almost universally, there is allowance for providing and even supporting the execution of evidence-based national practice. We have dietary guidelines. So helping someone to execute the guidelines or providing evidence and tools that are publicly available to execute those guidelines is generally legal. But again, check your individual state. The ANA, I believe that's American Nutrition Association, has state-by-state guides on what is allowed. So don't cross into other people's scope of practice. What can we do? First off, get a liability insurance. Whether or not you cross someone's scope of practice, because there is no legal-ish protection, anyone can sue you for any reason because they feel like you did a poor job. So first, get general liability insurance. It's not going to protect you from being sued. It just covers the costs if you get sued. One of our premier rules is coach, learn, and stay in the game so you can keep coaching and keep learning. So have general liability insurance so that if you get sued, you can pay those costs. 2, and this is the most important. This is where coaches, when we talk about scope of practice, what most coaches really mean is do your due diligence. What does that mean? First off, know the laws in your state for dietetics, for one. 2, know the client base and the level of support that you are comfortable with providing. So if you have experience in powerlifting, that's probably your best place to start. If you are going to be working, if you're going to advertise yourself as working with people who have MS, and you've never worked with anyone with MS before, and you've never had any education in it, and you don't have it, do your due diligence. Why would you take up that practice? And why would you take that liability and that risk? Third, educate yourself on the problems that your client base is generally going to have. If you get sued, one of the things that's going to come up, is this negligent? Did this person take the education to help them, that is reasonably believable, helps them prevent these kind of issues? If you've never gotten a single certification, if you've never essentially even tried, then that will come up as negligence. Again, not because there's a governing body saying what negligence means, but a jury is going to go, wow, what were you doing? And finally, know when to refer out. Again, this comes down to negligence. Have a grounding in your profession for what you can't handle. So for instance, if someone has an injury, it is well within a coach's right and job to help them train around that injury. And in Coaching 101 in the Principles course, we have a groundwork for how to work through that and around that. And also a list of contraindications and red flags for pushing off to a physical therapist or to a doctor. If you, again, think from yourself from the position of a jury. If somebody were to ask, when were you going to call a doctor? When were you going to recommend your patient see a physical therapist? and you're like, that's going to be seen as negligence. So have a standard practice, have a way of knowing when you need to push out, and execute on that consistently. Even if that just means this is when, these are my red flags, my triggers for when I tell my client, I recommend they should see a doctor, or I can't continue to work with you unless you see another professional, and then we can continue to work again. Those are somewhat limited situations, but having them on hand and knowing them is key for your liability, your protection, your sanity. And that is it for today. There's so much more to talk about in terms of certification, in terms of education, and the specifics on some of those issues, like when to refer out and that kind of thing. But that is what we're going to talk about for this one. So this individual highlights will go up on the Instagram channel, and the recording of this call will go up on the YouTube page. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you got some value out of this in terms of knowing and getting clarity and confidence. What am I allowed to do as a coach, and what does it take to make sure that I'm covered? It's been a pleasure. Have a great weekend.